Well, if you would have known me 4 years ago, I was a completely different person. And we're talking about grace tonight. Well, the only way I changed was through God's grace. And I've been in some dark places, so it doesn't matter where you're at or what you're doing. God wants to pull you out of that, Amen. And you can be forgiven. So I grew up in church. We're talking about that tonight. I did. I grew up in church, and as a little kid, I loved Jesus. Like, everything Jesus. My parents, I was blessed with Christian parents that, didn't drink, didn't do anything. They were strict, but I have a mother who prays and a father who loves. And, I'm very blessed, and a lot of you don't have that. And, I was an entitled little brat. So growing up on fire for God, and then, I turned like 11 and we moved to Sacramento. Moving at that age was really hard because, you're going through puberty, you're changing all the things. And
I wasn't at that age. It took me a little longer, but yeah, continue.
I was in the 6th grade, and so going to a new school in the 6th grade, that's hard. And I didn't know anyone, and I was bullied. I was always the chunky kid, and they were mean and whatever. But growing up, we did end up finding a church out here, and I was very involved. And as I started aging, I went through that. This is who I am, Dad, not a phase, black eyeliner, skinny jeans, whatever. I was an emo kid. But I was going to youth group, and I was actively on the worship team, very involved, went to summer camp, did all the things, Christian club at school. I didn't drink, I didn't do anything bad. I never had a boyfriend. I never kissed a guy until I was 18 or something. But during that season, I was very rebellious, and I didn't have self-control, and I didn't know what being obedient was, because I was just this angsty child. And so anyway, when I was a young girl, I was prophesied that music was going to be my gift. That was going to be my tool to do whatever. It wasn't really specific. It was just music over my life. So I started playing guitar at a very young age, and that was the only thing that kept me going. And then when I was able to play worship in church, it was good. But I let my ego take over. So I was always putting, church before God, because I grew up in church.
And you grew up in a different church than here. So tell the story about, it's kind of crazy, how you ended up here.
How I ended up here?
Visiting once.
Oh, yeah. Wait, okay, yeah. So I had this calling over my life, and I was walking in it, and I was getting really good. I had this mentor, and she was a broken lady, but she wanted to make me up to something, and I was a rebellious child, so me and this lady butt heads. And they actually, do they still have fine arts here?
Not here, but it's kind of like a talent show for Christians.
Yeah.
They
used to have it when it was Sunset. Yeah, so they used to have it here. And I was 17, and I literally have played the song 100 billion times. And I get on stage, but instead of letting God use my gift and me putting him first and letting him go through me, it was all ego. It was all I want to be the center of attention. I want to be this star or whatever. And getting on stage, the judges said, if you forget the words, you're automatically disqualified. Well, I start the first verse and I forget all the words. And I start standing there and I'm looking at everyone and I'm can I start over? And they're they didn't say anything. So I ran off the stage crying. And that was the first time I can honestly say I felt anxiety and I felt panic.
Wow.
And the lady who was mentoring me, instead of being it's cool, we're human, we mess up, whatever, she was what happened? You're so much better than this. Putting me down for messing up. And after that, I never played worship ever again. And because of that, my heart was so bitter and it was so hurt that I just let the bitterness take over, and my calling and my gift, I was just not me, not for me, that's not who I am, whatever. So I was continuing to go to church until I was 21 years old, and I ended up meeting a group of people in Midtown Sacramento, and they were a bunch of musicians, a bunch of local musicians in the town, and they knew everyone, and they played shows all the time, and it's the music scene was huge, and but these people were living in the world, and they were broken, and I let them influence me, and I moved to Midtown, and I started getting involved in these bands and stuff, and because of that moment that happened in church, I couldn't go on stage unless I was drunk. And let me tell you, you can't play music if you're drunk. And eventually I got kicked out of everything, and no one wanted me to like be a part of their stuff, and I had a reputation, and it was a pretty big reputation. So I was like, you know what? I'm just never playing music again. This isn't me. This isn't for me. And the bitterness just grew and grew, and I eventually just stopped praying, and I started hanging out with the nightlife of Midtown, and people loved me. I'm an extroverted human being, and the false joy that alcohol gave me and the false friends that it gave me, just like, it was almost like a drug, but it was all fake. It wasn't real. It was all false joy. Everyone was broken. Everyone was hurting, and so was I. And I was given into that lie.
And you kind of, from there, it kind of spiraled, right?
Yeah.
Relationships.
So, yeah.
Keep going.
So I lived in Midtown for 6 years. And the last 2 years of that, I met somebody, and he was charming, he was handsome, and I fell for it. And at this point, I was addicted to a lot of stuff. And he was too. But this relationship was very, very abusive, and panic and anxiety just overthrew me. I had panic attacks all the time. I was that person walking around being like, I have anxiety disorder, but really never got like checked out for it. And he had anxiety disorder too, but he took Xanax, and I got addicted to Xanax because I couldn't handle this relationship because it was abusive. I couldn't leave this relationship because I was codependent, and I needed love, and I didn't know what love was. So I was numb the entire relationship and never left. So by the end of it, I found out that he had been like cheating on me the entire time. And even at that point, I was like, with the abuse, like abuse, all sorts of abuse. At this point, I was finally like, oh, what this is bad. And then I stayed with him. And then finally one day, both of us intoxicated, we're fighting, he pushes me to the ground, and I'm just sitting there, and I just prayed to God, like, and this is like the first time I prayed to God in like years. And I was like, can you please make this guy break up with me? And he had left because he was mad, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I hear God's voice, and he's like, you know you can leave, right? You have a family that's been praying and loves you, and you can go home at any time. Like, you're the one choosing to stay in this relationship. And at that point, I called my mom. I was like, Mom, I'm done. I want to come home. And I've called my mom crying hundreds of billions of times. And I was like, I'm ready to go home. A week later, I moved out, almost 30 years old, and I moved back in with my parents.
Crazy.
And I had to humble myself because I didn't even have a car because I was living in Midtown. So Mama Olga had to drive me to work until I could afford to buy a car. So I definitely was broken. And when I moved home, I was a mess. I was 280 pounds, addicted to almost, you know, like Xanax and alcohol and whatever, but I smoked cigarettes. Like, I was addicted, and I was a brat. I was a brat. And
so you were at the point in your life where everything, I mean, you knew the pit that you were in,
yeah.
You knew you needed more, but it wasn't like everything got better. So, and then you started to come back to church, right?
Yeah, so this is how that happened. And I thank God every day for this angel that was brought into my life before I even realized what she would do in my life. But moving back home, I didn't have a car, so Rachel's like, yo, you want to go to the gym? That should make you feel better. Yeah, it's my sister Rachel over there. She's like, you want to go to the gym? That'll make you feel better. And I was like, sure, let's go to the gym. So this girl literally woke me up every morning at 6 a.m. to go to the gym with her, and I thank you for that, because now everything's changed. But anyway, during the time of the abusive relationship, everyone has a God void. Every single person has a God void, and we fill that void with anything and everything but God. So I've always been a spiritual person. I never stopped believing in God. I just never really knew who God was or what his character was because I grew up in church. So I started going down a really scary path, and I was going down the New Age path. And the New Age path is really scary because they use biblical words and terms, manipulate it, and make it, yourself can do this. You're self-empowered. You meditate, you can manifest anything. And I was going down this route, and every day in the car with Rachel, I'd be like, let me tell you about the indigos. And she'd be like, no. God's real. God's what I like, and she would stand firm in what she believed. Every single day, she wouldn't even play with my theology, because she knew it was wrong. She's like, I love my sister, but I'm not even going to pretend like that's okay. And because of that, she eventually invited me to here, DYA. And coming in, I'm like, ew, I'm like old and like I do stuff and I'm bad. And but I just kept coming. And also going back to worship, the bitterness in my heart when I would come here and watch everyone worship, I was just like, ew, this is weird. Why are we raising our hands? Like, I did not know how to tap into God. And again, that was my gift. That was my calling. And I couldn't do it because that bitterness was still around my heart. So I was going to DYA for like maybe 10 months, still not knowing what I was doing, but I was going. And I knew that it was changing me. But then, yeah, so.
Yeah, and then you kind of got to a place, I think, where you realized, like, she came back and you got to a place where you're like, I know that this is right?
Yeah.
And I know that I can register, this is registering with me. This is where I need to be. But then you kind of got into a place where you realized you hadn't dealt with stuff.
So, yeah, I hadn't dealt with stuff.
And you were numb.
Okay, so I'm about to be real with all you right now. So when I moved back home, I quit drinking, I quit smoking, I quit all the drugs except for one, and that was marijuana. And it's crazy because marijuana is like, oh, it's legal, it's natural, God made it, it's good, right? And that's what I believed. And, I've met stoner Christians, and they're cool. And there's even a church in Colorado now where you're allowed to smoke weed while the pastor's talking. So it's our culture. It's out there. It's open. And growing up in church, that was so taboo. Like, we didn't talk about that. So when coming here, I was like still doing it. And I was like, I can't tell anyone about this. So I didn't connect with people at DYA at all because I had a little dirty little secret and I was afraid to be vulnerable.
And I'm pretty good at breaking down walls. I couldn't break these walls down. She had them built high.
I know people are like, I was intimidated by you. And I was like, no, really, I was freaking out. But it's okay. But I was starting, to understand God. And I knew that, like, the New Age stuff was wrong and selfish. And he was revealing things to me. But I never really fully, surrendered yet. I still had the bitterness. And I was still smoking. And... the first fast came. It was 2018 fast, and I fasted social media. That was all I could do because I was like, I've never fasted before. This is weird. But, God spoke to me a lot, and at that moment, he, released me from it. I stopped smoking weed, and I was like, cool. And it was 5 months down the line, and I was like, yeah, I'm on fire for God. I get this. Again, I didn't heal my heart yet at this point. And then... this guy comes and he's Christian and he plays music and he's charming and whatever and he asked me for my phone number, and I remember in that exact moment God's like, no, say no to him, don't give him your phone number, this is not your destiny, you're not ready to date yet, you got out of an abusive relationship a year and a half ago, no. And what did I do? I gave him my phone number, and we ended up dating for a little while, but that relationship, it threw me way back, and it broke me even more because I knew it was right, but I was putting him before God. And when I was still a baby Christian. I was still learning. I didn't know God's character 100%. And I was still bitter. So I'd ask him questions, and it was just about the relationship, and that was it. So we broke up over the summer, and I went back to marijuana. I was like, I'm broken. This is weird. I don't know what's going on. I'm hurt. I'm whatever. And I stopped coming to DYA. And then I was even more hurt because no one reached out to me when I left. But how could they reach out to me when I wasn't opening up and being vulnerable to everybody? So my 29th birthday hit in September, and I was alone. I had no friends because I was isolating myself all summer long. And at that moment, I just started crying. And that was when I fully surrendered. I was like, okay, God, I don't know what I'm doing here. Can you just take it? And in that moment, I surrendered, and he spoke to me, and he started revealing stuff and saying, I've been waiting for this moment. I just been waiting I want to show you my character. And now here I finally can, because you're finally surrendering. And I felt his grace, and I forget forgiveness, but it took a while to get to where I'm at right now, for sure.
And that's awesome. And you even told me while we're talking just about how like you struggled, and once you stopped smoking weed, you realized, oh my gosh, once I stopped numbing myself, there's so much undealt with things. So, it brings you a false sense of peace, correct?
Okay, yeah, false. So that with the fast, after that broke, that was one thing God revealed. I stopped smoking weed, and I was like, oh, I'm healed from my abusive relationship. I'm good. And then I stopped smoking weed, and all that crap hit me in the face. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I didn't heal. I was numbing the entire time. So whatever vice you're into or whatever, just know that it brings false joy. You're trying to fill that God void with a sense, like you think, oh, I need to drink to be who I really am, but you don't. So yeah.
So where are you at right now? What's your mindset?
So my mindset, coming back to DYA, really learning who God's character was. He healed my heart in that moment when I surrendered. He healed that heart, and now worshiping, that's like the most intimate time I have with God. Like, I have a heart of worship, and Satan took that away from me. I let him take that away from me because of ego, because of, whatever, focusing on anything but God. And so now I'm fully surrendered to God, but I'm human, and the struggle's real every day. I'm not gonna lie, I smoked weed a few days ago, and Rylie called me on that day. And I looked at his, and I don't even have his phone number. And I'm like, oh, this is Rylie. And I threw my phone. And I was like, I can't talk to him. Hi. Oh my gosh. And then, and in that moment, I mean, it's only been a few days, but the switch that flicked in me, the first fast when I quit alcohol completely, the same feeling happened over the marijuana. But it's only been a few days.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just say this. I think as we were talking, she's like, I kind of slipped up and I smoked, and I was like, okay. And she's like, basically like, so you still want me to share? And I think we as the church, and this is kind of what's awesome about Jesus, is like, it's so different than we expect. He's so much better than we think. And as the church, we're meant to represent that. And sometimes, or actually too often, like we promote perfection instead of progress.
Exactly. Yep.
And I don't expect you to come up here, and I don't expect people to come into church who are perfect. I expect like people who need to be changed to come, and look, we're going to walk with you. We're going to walk with you, whatever season you're in. We're committed to this. And so I think that's why your testimony, your story is so beautiful, is because for so long you were like, keeping everybody at an arm's distance or an arm's length because of this thing internally. And it was just a shadow. Because if you only knew what we were thinking, I'm just like, all right, cool. Like, good. That's the first step. Tell me what it is. And I don't care about fixing you. I just care about you being in relationship with Jesus. And so your story's awesome. And I think it's going to set some people free tonight.
Well, one thing I just want to say too. Yeah, I've been good, and I've been more vulnerable to people in this room than I've ever been in my entire life. I didn't know how to have healthy relationships. I didn't know how to love unconditionally. It was God's revealing his character to me. I'm learning how to love unconditionally, and God is showing me his love and his grace and his mercy over me. My whole life I've been like, I'm not a leader. Stand in the background, please everybody else. But he's like, you're called to be a leader. You have a gift over your heart, and I want to use you, and I don't care if you're a mess right now. I'm going to, Rylie calling me when I'm high. He's like, I'm going to use you in your mess, and I don't care. And, when I first started coming... When I first started coming here, keeping everyone at arm's distance, I have a feeling that all of you are kind of in that boat too, because it was awkward coming here, and everyone was kind of in their own little space. But you know what? He wants you to be vulnerable. He wants you to be vulnerable about what's going on in your life. That's the only way we connect as humans. These shallow conversations, like, go deeper. Tell people what's going on so we can pray for you and help you and whatever, that's obedience and being vulnerable and just loving on people. So yeah.
Good. Will you give her a hand one more time and thank her for sharing? Thank you. Killed it.